Hey warriors, let me ask you something nobody ever stops long enough to ask. When was the last time your mind was actually quiet? Not distracted, not scrolling, not running through tomorrow's problems or yesterday's regrets. Actually quiet. If you're struggling to remember, that's not a coincidence. That's a pattern. And patterns can be broken. Here's what most people never figure out. Negative thoughts don't just appear out of nowhere like random bad luck. They follow rules. They have triggers. They run on systems that were built, mostly without your permission, over years of absorbing other people's fears, other people's expectations, and a world that profits from keeping your mind loud and restless. You were not born anxious. You were not born with a mind full of self-doubt and worst-case scenarios. Watch any 2-year-old. They're not lying awake at night, catastrophizing about next quarter's performance review. They're completely absorbed in whatever's right in front of them. A leaf, a shadow, a spoon, fully present, completely at peace with existing. Something happened between then and now. Life layered itself on top of that natural clarity, and most people spend their entire adult lives not even realizing that clarity is still there, buried, not gone. The Stoics understood this thousands of years ago. Marcus Aurelius, a man running the most powerful empire in the world, surrounded by war, betrayal, and pressure most of us will never know, still managed to maintain a mind so disciplined, so clear, that his private journals read like a masterclass in peace. He wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." He wasn't born with that strength. He built it, habit by habit, day by day. That's exactly what this is about. Over the next 7 parts, you're going to learn 10 Stoic habits that don't just manage negative thoughts, they cut them off at the root. These aren't feel-good theories. These aren't ideas that sound great until Monday morning when real life hits. These are practiced, tested, battle-worn habits from people who faced real adversity and chose mental mastery over mental chaos. But before we get into the habits, let's talk about why most people fail before they even start. The biggest mistake people make when dealing with negative thoughts is treating them like enemies that need to be destroyed. They white-knuckle through the day, trying to suppress every dark thought, every anxious feeling, every moment of self-doubt. And then they wonder why, by evening, they're completely drained and the negative thoughts are louder than ever. Here's the truth that changes everything. You cannot fight your way to a peaceful mind. A battlefield mentality toward your own thoughts creates more war, not less. The Stoic approach is different. It's not about destroying what's negative. It's about building what's strong, so strong that negativity simply loses its grip. Like a weed that can't survive in healthy soil, you don't fight the weed. You change the conditions. That's what these 10 habits do. They change the internal conditions. They reshape the soil of the mind so that toxic thought patterns stop finding anything to hold on to. And here's what makes this approach different from every motivational video you've half-watched and forgotten by the next morning. It's not built on inspiration. Inspiration fades. Everyone's felt that temporary fire, that 30-minute burst after a powerful video where everything feels possible, and then watched it quietly disappear by the time dinner's done. These habits are built on something that doesn't fade. Repetition. Structure. The quiet, unglamorous, deeply powerful act of showing up for your own mind every single day, especially when you don't feel like it, especially when it seems pointless, especially then, because that's when it matters most. Your mind is not your enemy. It never was. It's just been running on an old program that nobody ever taught you how to update. That changes now. Stay with this. All 7 parts. Because what's coming isn't just information, it's a system. And systems, when followed, don't just change how you think. They change who you become. Habit 1. Name it to diffuse it. There's a moment, most people blow right past it, that contains more power than any productivity hack, any morning routine, any self-help book ever written. It's the split second between when a negative thought appears and when you decide what to do with it. Most people never even notice that moment exists. The thought shows up, and they're already inside it, already believing it, already reacting to it, already building a whole emotional world around something that hasn't even been verified as true. A thought about failure appears, and within seconds the mind is constructing an entire future where everything falls apart. A thought about rejection appears, and suddenly there's a complete narrative about being fundamentally unlovable. That's not thinking, that's being dragged. The first Stoic habit is so simple it almost sounds too easy, and that's exactly why most people underestimate it. When a negative thought appears, don't react to it. Name it. Just that. Name it. That's an anxiety thought. That's a shame spiral starting. That's a comparison thought. That's catastrophizing. Sounds almost childishly simple, right? Here's what's actually happening underneath that simplicity. When you label a thought, you activate the prefrontal cortex, the rational, observing part of your brain. And the moment that part activates, the emotional intensity of the thought drops. Neuroscientists call it affect labeling. The Stoics called it separating impression from judgment. Different language, same profound truth. Epictetus built his entire philosophy around this one idea. He taught that nothing has power over you except your own interpretation of it, not the thought itself, your relationship to it. The thought is just an event. Labeling it reminds your brain, this is an event happening, not a truth being revealed. Here's where it gets practical. Most people treat their thoughts like announcements. The mind says you're not good enough, and the person receives it like a news anchor just broke the story. Official, confirmed, real. A trained mind treats thoughts like weather reports. Weather shows up, you notice it. You name it, cloudy, stormy, overcast. But you don't become the storm. You're the one watching it from inside a house with solid walls. Building this habit takes about 2 weeks of consistent practice to start feeling natural. Here's how to actually do it. Not theoretically, but today, starting now. Every time a negative thought pulls at your attention, pause for one breath, just one. In that breath, ask yourself, what category does this fall into? Is this a fear thought? Something projecting danger into the future? Is this a regret thought? Something anchoring pain to the past? Is this a comparison thought? Measuring your life against someone else's highlight reel? Is this a self-criticism thought? An old voice that learned to be harsh because harshness once felt like protection? Name the category. Say it quietly in your head or write it down if you can. Then notice what happens to the thought's intensity. It shrinks, not because you fought it, because you saw it clearly. And clarity is the thing toxic thoughts cannot survive. Seneca wrote, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." Most of the suffering that fills a human mind on an average Tuesday isn't responding to what's actually happening. It's responding to what the mind is generating and then accepting as real without question. The naming habit breaks that automatic acceptance. It inserts a pause, and in that pause lives the entire difference between a mind that's ruled and a mind that rules. This isn't about becoming emotionally cold or detached. You're not trying to stop feeling things. You're learning to feel them without being consumed by them. The thought visits. You see it. You name it. And then, this is the part that builds over time, you watch it lose its grip. Because a named thought is a seen thought, and what is fully seen can no longer pretend to be bigger than it is. Habit 2. Practice the pause before the response. If naming the thought is the first move, the second habit is about what happens right after. The response. And this is where most people hand their power away without realizing it. A difficult email arrives. The immediate emotional reaction fires. And before a single second of real thought happens, a reactive response is already being typed, sharp, defensive, fueled by whatever the first wave of feeling brought in. Or a conversation takes a turn and words come out that were never consciously chosen, they just happened, pulled by the emotional current of the moment. The Stoics were ruthlessly focused on this gap between stimulus and response. They trained it like a muscle because they understood something that modern psychology has since confirmed: the quality of your entire life is largely determined by the quality of your responses. Not what happens to you, what you do in the moment after. Marcus Aurelius practiced this daily. When confronted with frustration, criticism, betrayal, and as emperor he faced all three constantly, his trained response was to pause before responding. Not a dramatic pause, not a performance, a genuine internal moment of choosing who he wanted to be in this situation before the situation chose for him. Here's the practical form of this habit. When something triggers a negative emotional reaction, whether it's a thought, an event, or another person, build a single deliberate action before responding. It can be one slow breath. It can be silently counting to 5. It can be physically setting something down before speaking. The specific action matters less than the consistency of using it. What you're doing is breaking the automatic stimulus response chain. You're inserting a moment of agency into a process that normally runs on autopilot. And in that inserted moment, however brief, you get to ask the question that changes outcomes. Is my response right now going to make this better or worse? Not perfect, not impressive, just better or worse. That one question, practiced daily, reshapes how you move through conflict, through pressure, through the moments when the mind goes loud and reactive. It's not weakness to pause. Every Stoic philosopher would tell you the same thing. The person who can hold their response while everything inside them is pushing for reaction is not passive. They are powerful in the truest sense of the word.
Because real strength was never about how fast you react. It was always about how wisely you choose. Habit 3. Guard the gates of your mind every single day. Without asking your permission, the world is trying to move into your head, not metaphorically, literally. From the moment your eyes open in the morning to the moment they close at night, there is a constant incoming stream of information, opinion, emotion, and energy. Most of it unfiltered, most of it unconstructive, and almost none of it selected by you with any real intention.
Someone else's argument on social media becomes your anxiety for the afternoon. A news headline about something happening thousands of miles away becomes a weight sitting on your chest during dinner. A comment from a coworker, half intended, fully forgotten by them, lives in your mind rent-free for 3 days, reshaping how you see yourself without you even realizing it's happening. This is not weakness. This is what happens to any unguarded mind in the modern world. The question is whether you're going to keep letting it happen. The Stoics were almost radical about this. In a time without smartphones and 24-hour news cycles, they still understood that what enters the mind shapes the mind. Seneca wrote with a directness that feels almost aggressive by today's standards. Avoid above all things the company of those who will drain you, infect your thoughts, and leave your mind worse than they found it. He wasn't being antisocial. He was being precise about something most people never take seriously, that the mind is permeable, and permeability without discrimination is dangerous. Guarding the gates of your mind is not about building walls against reality. It's about becoming intentional with access. Deciding, consciously, deliberately, what gets to take up space in your mental world, and what doesn't earn that right. Here's what this habit looks like in practice, starting with the most impactful change most people can make immediately. The first 30 minutes of your morning are neurologically special. Your brain is transitioning out of sleep. Your stress hormones haven't fully activated yet, and your mind is in its most receptive, impressionable state of the entire day. What you feed it during those 30 minutes sets the emotional and cognitive tone for hours that follow. Most people spend those 30 minutes handing their freshest, clearest mental state directly to their phone, to strangers arguing online, to curated images of lives that aren't theirs, to headlines engineered to trigger alarm, and then they wonder why by 9 a.m. they already feel scattered, vaguely anxious, and somehow already behind. Protect that window. Not with perfection, with intention. Even 10 minutes of silence, of slow breathing, of something that nourishes rather than depletes, changes what the rest of the morning feels like. The mind that starts clear has a fighting chance of staying clear. The mind that starts in someone else's chaos rarely finds its footing before noon. Beyond the morning, this habit extends to the ongoing audit of what you're regularly consuming. Not a dramatic purge, a quiet, honest inventory. Look at what you watch, what you read, who you spend extended time around, what plays in your background. After each input, notice what state your mind is in. Lighter or heavier, more capable or more doubtful, more focused or more fragmented. That noticing is data. Use it. Unfollow what consistently leaves you feeling smaller than before you saw it. Step back from conversations that are really just mutual complaint sessions dressed up as connection. Stop finishing content that was draining you 10 minutes ago, but you kept consuming out of habit or the sunk cost feeling of having already started. None of this is about avoiding difficulty or pretending the world has no darkness. The Stoics faced brutal realities, exile, slavery, war, loss, and they didn't look away from any of it. What they refused to do was marinate in it unnecessarily. There's a difference between engaging with reality and bathing in toxicity, between staying informed and drowning in manufactured outrage, between real connection and emotional dumping. Learn that difference. Then live it. Here's something worth sitting with. Your mental environment is as real and as consequential as your physical one. You wouldn't eat from a plate that someone kept spitting on. You wouldn't sleep in a room filling slowly with smoke and call it fine because you couldn't see the flames. The same standard applies to what you let into your mind. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private journal, a document never intended for anyone else's eyes, "The things you think about determine the quality of your mind. Your soul takes on the color of your thoughts." He was reminding himself daily because he knew that even with the best intentions, the mind drifts toward whatever it's most exposed to. Guarding against that drift wasn't a one-time decision. It was a daily practice. Make it yours too. Habit 4. Sit with silence before it scares you. Most people in the modern world are terrified of silence. Not consciously, they'd never say that out loud. But watch the behavior. The moment there's nothing demanding attention, out comes the phone. The moment a quiet minute appears in the day, music goes on, a podcast starts, something fills the space before the silence can settle. This constant filling is not relaxation, it's avoidance. And what's being avoided, more often than not, is the mind itself. There's a painful irony here. The very thing people are running from, their own thoughts, is the only thing that, when faced directly, loses its power to frighten. Silence doesn't create negative thoughts. It reveals the ones already there. And revelation, uncomfortable as it is the first step toward resolution. The Stoics built deliberate silence into their practice. Not as punishment, not as some austere performance of discipline. As a tool, a way of hearing what the mind was actually doing beneath the noise, so they could address it with clarity instead of reacting to it blindly. This habit starts smaller than you think it needs to. 5 minutes. That's it. 5 minutes daily of sitting with no input, no phone, no music, no podcast, no television in the background. Just you and whatever the mind brings up. It will feel uncomfortable at first. Thoughts will surface that you'd rather not look at. Old regrets, current fears, things left unsaid, decisions left unmade. Let them come. Don't chase them, don't fight them, just observe. You are not the thoughts appearing, you are the one watching them appear. That distinction, felt in the body during real silence, is worth more than any philosophy lecture ever delivered. Start with 5 minutes. Build toward 10. Notice what shifts. Because the mind that can sit with itself in silence is a mind that has stopped running. And a mind that has stopped running has finally found solid ground. Habit 5. Rewrite the story you keep telling yourself. Right now, running quietly in the background of everything you do, there is a narrator. It's been there so long, you've stopped noticing it. It comments on everything. Your appearance, your performance, your relationships, your future, your worth. It interprets every situation, fills in every gap, assigns meaning to every silence and every look and every outcome. And for most people, that narrator is not kind. It is not fair. And it is almost certainly not accurate. It says things like, "This always happens to me. I'm not the kind of person who succeeds at this. People like me don't get that. I knew it wouldn't work out." These aren't random thoughts. They're a story, a fixed, familiar narrative that was built over years from collected experiences, absorbed criticisms, and moments of pain that never fully processed. And now that story runs automatically, shaping how every new situation gets interpreted before it's even fully understood. Here's what the Stoics grasped with uncomfortable precision. You do not experience reality directly. You experience your interpretation of reality. And your interpretation is almost entirely controlled by the story your mind has decided is true about you and about the world. Which means the story is the leverage point. Change the story, and without a single external circumstance shifting, the experience of life changes. This is not positive thinking. Positive thinking asks you to paste optimism over a narrative that's still broken underneath. What this habit asks for is something harder and more honest. It asks you to question whether the story is actually true in the first place. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth." He was talking about the gap between what happens and what we tell ourselves it means. That gap is where the toxic narrative lives, and that gap is where this habit does its work. Here's the practice. When a negative thought about yourself or your situation surfaces, stop before accepting it and ask 3 questions. First, is this actually a fact, or is it an interpretation? Second, if a close friend described this same situation to me, would I tell them the same harsh story I'm telling myself? Third, What's a more accurate version of this story that still acknowledges the difficulty but doesn't collapse it into a permanent verdict? Take something real. A presentation at work doesn't land the way you hoped. The automatic story fires immediately. I'm not capable. Everyone could see it. This confirms everything I've feared about myself. That's not an assessment. That's a prosecution. Now apply the 3 questions. Fact or interpretation, one presentation underperformed. That's the fact. The rest is story. What would you tell a friend? You'd tell them one difficult moment doesn't define their capability. You know that clearly for someone else. You deserve that same clarity turned inward. More accurate version. This didn't go as planned, which is information, not identity. There's something specific to adjust, not something fundamentally wrong to confirm. Same situation. Completely different internal experience. Not because reality was sugar-coated, because the story told about reality became honest instead of cruel. This habit requires something that feels counterintuitive at first. You have to slow down in the moments when the mind most wants to run fast. Negative narratives build speed quickly. They feel urgent, conclusive, final. The pause, that deliberate slowing, is where the story loses its automatic authority and becomes something you can actually examine. Epictetus, who spent years of his life enslaved, a circumstance that would break most narratives entirely, still maintained that the one freedom no external force could ever take was the freedom to choose his own interpretation of events. He wasn't naive about suffering. He was precise about where power actually lived, not in what happened. In the story constructed around what happened, your narrator has been running unsupervised for a long time. It's not your enemy. It was doing its best with what it learned. But it learned from incomplete information, from fear, from other people's unprocessed pain passed down like inheritance. It doesn't need to be silenced. It needs to be updated. Give it better material to work with. Ask harder questions of the stories it tells. Hold the harsh ones up to actual evidence and watch how rarely they survive honest examination. Because the story being told inside that mind, quietly, constantly, beneath everything, is either building the life you want or slowly dismantling it. There is no neutral narrator. There is only the one running right now, and the decision about whether to leave it unexamined or finally take the pen back. Habit 6. Use your body to reset your mind. The mind and body are not two separate systems politely coexisting. They are one deeply integrated system, constantly communicating, constantly influencing each other in ways that most people dramatically underestimate until they feel it directly. Think about the last time genuine consuming anxiety hit. Where did you feel it? Not just in thought, in the chest, in the stomach, in the tightening of the shoulders, in the shallow breathing that started without permission. The mind went to a dark place, and the body followed immediately, fluently, without being asked. That connection runs both directions, which means the body can be used, deliberately, practically, to pull the mind out of a toxic spiral that thinking alone cannot escape. This is not a metaphor. This is physiology. And the Stoics, despite living 2,000 years before modern neuroscience had language for it, built physical practice directly into their philosophy because they understood this truth through observation and experience. They walked while they thought. They trained physically. They practiced deliberate cold, deliberate heat, deliberate discomfort, not as punishment, but as proof that the mind could be separated from its automatic reactions to sensation. Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, none of them treated philosophy as a purely intellectual exercise. It lived in the body, or it didn't live at all. Here's what this looks like when negative thoughts are taking over and thinking your way out isn't working, because sometimes it genuinely won't. The mind is too loud, too fast, too tangled in its own loops. Move. That's the habit. Not heroically, not intensely. Just move. Stand up from wherever you are and walk, outside if possible, around the room if not. The rhythmic bilateral movement of walking literally shifts brain activity, reducing the intensity of emotionally charged thought and creating neurological conditions more favorable to calm, clear thinking. This is documented, repeatable, and available to you at zero cost within the next 60 seconds. If walking isn't accessible in the moment, change your physical position entirely. If you've been sitting, stand. If you've been indoors, step outside. If your shoulders have been rounded forward, the unconscious posture of anxiety and defeat, deliberately open your chest, pull your shoulders back, and lift your chin. Hold that position for 60 seconds and notice what it does to your internal state. The body keeps a running record of every emotion that never fully moved through. Every stress that got suppressed instead of released. Every anger that got swallowed instead of expressed. That stored energy doesn't disappear, it accumulates. And it makes the mind heavier, darker, more reactive over time. Give the body regular permission to release what it's been holding. Walk. Stretch. Breathe deeply and deliberately. If emotion is high, use physical intensity. Push against a wall, move quickly. Let the body complete what the stress response started. Then, slow down. Let the nervous system return to baseline. Notice how the mind follows. This habit, practiced consistently, does something profound over time. It teaches the mind that difficult emotional states are temporary, that they move through when given a physical pathway rather than being trapped in mental loops. The anxiety that felt permanent at a desk at 2 p.m. feels entirely different after a 20-minute walk. Not because the problem solved itself. Because the system reset. Your mind lives in your body. Treat both accordingly. Habit 7. Close what's open before it drains you silent. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with how much you slept last night. You wake up after 8 full hours and still feel heavy, still feel like something is pressing down before the day has even started. You go through the motions, coffee, shower, the mechanical beginning of another morning, but underneath all of it, there's this low, persistent hum of weight that you can't quite locate or explain. Most people chalk this up to stress in general, to life being hard, to just the way things are. But trace that weight carefully, and almost always you'll find the same thing underneath it: unfinished business. Not dramatic, unresolved trauma necessarily, though that too. The quieter kind. The accumulation of small open loops that the mind is quietly, invisibly, constantly trying to manage in the background. That conversation you've been meaning to have for 3 weeks. The decision that's been sitting in the "I'll think about it later" category for 2 months. The apology not yet made. The project half completed. The boundary that needed setting 6 situations ago. The email sitting in the drafts folder. The thing you promised yourself you'd deal with when you felt ready, and ready keeps not arriving. Every single one of these is an open loop, and the mind, by its very nature, cannot rest fully while loops remain open. It keeps returning to them, quietly pulling attention back, running background processes on unresolved things, even when you're trying to focus on something else entirely. Even when you're trying to sleep. Psychologists call this the Zeigarnik effect, the mind's tendency to fixate on incomplete tasks far more persistently than completed ones. The Stoics didn't have that specific terminology, but they understood the underlying reality completely. Epictetus taught not just to identify what was within your control, but to act on it. Fully, completely, to close the loop rather than simply acknowledging it existed. Because acknowledgement without action is not resolution. It's just a more conscious version of the same drain. Here's what this habit requires and why most people resist it. Closing open loops almost always involves doing something uncomfortable. That's precisely why the loop stayed open. The conversation feels risky, the decision feels permanent, the apology feels vulnerable, the boundary feels confrontational. So the mind keeps it hovering in unresolved territory, which feels safer than the discomfort of resolution, but is actually far more costly over time. Think about it this way. The discomfort of having a difficult conversation lasts hours, maybe a day. The discomfort of leaving that conversation permanently unresolved, replaying what should have been said, carrying low-grade anxiety every time that person's name appears, never quite being fully present in any other interaction because part of your attention is always partially back in that unresolved place. That discomfort lasts indefinitely. It compounds. The math is not complicated once you see it clearly. Short discomfort closes the loop. Avoided discomfort keeps the drain running. Here's the practical form this habit takes. Once a week, not daily, that's overwhelming. Once a week, sit down with something to write on and ask yourself one honest question. What am I carrying right now that could be resolved if I was willing to be slightly uncomfortable? Write whatever surfaces without filtering it, the thing you've been avoiding making a decision about. The relationship situation that needs a real conversation. The commitment you made to yourself that you keep quietly breaking and quietly feeling guilty about. The health appointment you've been rescheduling. The creative project sitting untouched while its incompleteness nags at you from the edges of your awareness. Look at the list. Then pick one. Just one. And this week, not someday, this week, take the single next step toward closing it. Not the whole resolution necessarily, just the next step. Make the appointment. Send the message that starts the conversation. Make the decision even if it's imperfect. Write the first paragraph. Set the boundary in the smallest, most immediate situation where it applies. One loop closed creates something beyond just the practical resolution of that specific thing. It creates momentum. It proves to the mind that completion is possible, that the uncomfortable thing survived contact with reality and the world continued. And that proof makes the next loop slightly easier to close. And the next one easier still. Marcus Aurelius returned to this principle repeatedly throughout his journals. Do not postpone what can be addressed now. Not from urgency or anxiety, from the clear-eyed recognition that delay accumulates cost. That every day something remains unresolved is another day the mind spends resources managing its incompleteness, instead of directing that energy towards something that actually matters. There's also a version of this habit for loops that genuinely cannot be closed externally. The relationship that ended without resolution because the other person won't communicate. The loss that doesn't have a tidy conclusion. The situation that's outside your control to fully resolve. These loops can still be closed internally. Not by pretending the pain isn't real. By making a conscious decision, I have done what I can with what is mine to do. What remains is beyond my reach. I am releasing my mind from the obligation of continuously returning to what cannot change. That is not giving up. In Stoic terms, that is the clearest possible expression of wisdom, knowing precisely where your agency ends and refusing to hemorrhage mental energy past that boundary. The mind craves completion the way the lungs crave air. It is wired for resolution, for closure, for the satisfaction of a thing fully done. Every open loop is working against that wiring. Every closed loop works with it. And when enough loops close, not all of them, never all of them at once, but enough, something shifts in the quality of daily mental experience that is difficult to describe until you feel it. The background hum quiets. The persistent low-grade weight lifts. Focus sharpens because it's no longer being silently fractured across 15 unresolved things demanding background attention. The mind finally has room to breathe, not because life became easier, because you stopped letting undone things pile up in the most valuable real estate you own, the interior of your own mind. Close what is open. Start this week. Start with 1. Your mind will thank you in a language you'll feel before you can name it. A lightness, a clarity, a sense of being fully present in your own life for the first time in longer than you probably realize. That feeling is available. It's waiting on the other side of the conversations you haven't had, the decisions you haven't made, and the loops you haven't yet been willing to close. Go close 1. Habit 8. Embrace discomfort as a training ground, not a stop sign. There is a moment everyone knows. The alarm goes off earlier than the body wants. The difficult conversation needs to happen, but every instinct says not today. The work that matters sits waiting while easier, lighter things quietly steal the hours. The uncomfortable feeling rises, and the automatic reach for the phone, the snack, the scroll, the distraction happens before a single conscious decision was made. That moment, that precise fork between leaning into discomfort and turning away from it, is where the quality of your mental life is decided more than anywhere else. Not in the big dramatic crossroads, not in the once-a-decade pivotal choices that feel important enough to take seriously. In the small, daily, almost invisible moment of choosing whether to move toward discomfort or away from it. That choice, repeated hundreds of times across weeks and months and years, is what builds either a mind that has been strengthened through use, or a mind that has slowly, quietly, been made fragile through constant protection from anything that doesn't feel immediately comfortable. The Stoics were almost ruthless about this. Not because they enjoyed suffering, that's a misreading of Stoicism that misses everything important, but because they understood something that required genuine wisdom to hold clearly. Discomfort voluntarily chosen builds capacity. Discomfort avoided builds fear. Seneca practiced what he called voluntary hardship, deliberately choosing periods of reduced comfort, simpler meals, physical challenge, not as punishment, but as proof. Proof to himself that he could handle difficulty, that his well-being was not dependent on external conditions remaining favorable, that the things he feared losing, if lost, would not destroy him. He wrote, "Set aside a certain number of days during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with rough and coarse clothing, saying to yourself all the while, 'Is this the condition I so feared?'" Read that again slowly. Is this the condition I so feared? Because most of the negative thoughts consuming mental space on any given day are not responses to actual present difficulty. They are responses to imagined future discomfort. Fear of how something might feel. Anxiety about a conversation that hasn't happened. Dread of an outcome that hasn't arrived. The mind generates suffering about a discomfort that hasn't even occurred yet, and often never will. Voluntary discomfort breaks that cycle at its root. When you regularly, deliberately choose difficulty in small doses, a cold shower, a hard conversation pursued instead of avoided, a commitment honored when breaking it would be easier, physical effort when rest would be simpler. Something shifts in the mind's relationship to discomfort itself. It stops being a stop sign. It becomes information. Feedback. Evidence that you are moving in a direction that requires something from you, which is almost always the direction worth moving in. Here's what this habit looks like practically, built gradually rather than dramatically. Start with one daily voluntary discomfort. Just one. Small enough to be sustainable, uncomfortable enough to be real. A cold 30 seconds at the end of your shower. One conversation this week that you've been avoiding. Finishing the task before checking your phone instead of after. Sitting with an uncomfortable emotion for 5 full minutes instead of immediately reaching for something to dull it. The specific discomfort matters less than the pattern of choosing it. What you're building is not a collection of impressive hard things you've done. You're building evidence, personal, embodied, undeniable evidence that discomfort does not break you. That you can move toward difficult things and survive the contact. That the fear of the thing is almost always significantly worse than the thing itself. And here's what happens to negative thoughts inside a mind that has been regularly trained through voluntary discomfort. They lose authority. The thought that says this is going to be too hard carries very different weight in a mind that has repeatedly chosen hard things and come through them, versus a mind that has been carefully protected from difficulty. In the trained mind, that thought is recognized for what it is: resistance, not prophecy. A feeling, not a fact. Something to move through, not a verdict to accept. Marcus Aurelius faced circumstances that would genuinely break most people. Plague, war, betrayal by people close to him, the death of children, the constant weight of an empire that depended on his decisions. He did not navigate those years on inspiration or natural resilience. He navigated them on trained capacity, a mind and character that had been deliberately built through consistent practice of virtue and voluntary difficulty, until strength was not an effort but a default. That is what this habit builds toward. Not a life without hard things, that life doesn't exist for anyone. A life where hard things are met with a mind that has already proven to itself it can handle them. There's also something the Stoics noticed about discomfort that modern life almost completely ignores. It clarifies. When the comfortable options are removed or voluntarily set aside, what actually matters becomes suddenly, startlingly clear. The things people spend enormous mental energy worrying about, status, approval, minor inconveniences, the opinions of people who barely know them, lose their grip almost immediately when real difficulty shows up. Perspective arrives uninvited, and it is almost always useful. This is why people often report that their hardest periods, loss, illness, genuine struggle, paradoxically also produced their greatest clarity about what mattered. The discomfort stripped away the noise and left only what was real. You don't have to wait for crisis to access that clarity. Voluntary discomfort delivers a smaller, sustainable version of it daily. Here is the reframe that makes this habit genuinely sustainable, rather than a willpower exercise that collapses after 2 weeks. Stop asking whether something feels comfortable. Start asking whether it makes you more capable. Comfortable and capable are not the same destination. Often they pull in opposite directions. The mind that is always kept comfortable is a mind that is slowly losing the very strength it would need when comfort inevitably ends, as it always does. The mind that is regularly challenged through chosen difficulty is a mind that arrives at hard moments already familiar with the terrain. The negative thoughts that currently feel overwhelming, permanent, impossible to manage, they feel that way in part because the mind hasn't yet built enough evidence of its own resilience. Every time you have chosen the comfortable option over the necessary one, you have accidentally reinforced the story that difficulty is something to be feared and avoided rather than something you are capable of moving through. Start changing that evidence base. One deliberate, small, voluntary discomfort at a time. Not because you enjoy suffering, because you understand, the way the Stoics understood, that a mind trained through chosen difficulty is the most powerful, most peaceful, most unshakable version of the mind available to you. And that mind is not something you find. It is something you build. Day by day, choice by choice. One small movement toward difficulty at a time, until difficulty no longer frightens you the way it once did, until it becomes simply another part of the terrain you know you can cross. Because you have crossed it before, and you will cross it again. And the crossing, repeated enough times, eventually stops feeling like struggle. It starts feeling like home. Habit 9. Return to the present moment like it's your job. The mind has a default setting that nobody chose and almost nobody questions. Left completely to itself, without deliberate direction, the mind drifts backward into memory, replaying moments that can no longer be changed, rehearsing conversations that already happened, reconstructing past versions of situations, looking for different outcomes that will never arrive, or forward into imagination, projecting fears into futures that haven't happened yet, constructing worst-case scenarios with vivid detail, rehearsing disasters that exist only in the space between what is real and what the mind has decided to treat as real. Past and future, that's where the untrained mind lives. And that's precisely where negative thoughts find their most fertile ground. Think about it honestly. The vast majority of thoughts that genuinely disturb your peace, the ones that create that hollow, anxious feeling in your chest, the ones that follow you through an otherwise ordinary day and make it feel heavy, almost none of them are about what is actually happening right now in this present moment. They are about what happened before or what might happen ahead. About the version of you that exists in memory, or the version of you that might exist in a feared future. The present moment, by contrast, is almost always manageable. Not always comfortable, not always easy, but manageable. What is happening right now, in this specific moment, is something you are already surviving. Because you are here, reading this, which means every difficult moment before this one did not permanently end you, regardless of how certain that outcome felt when those moments were happening. Marcus Aurelius returned to this truth constantly throughout his journals, not as poetry, as practical instruction to himself. Confine yourself to the present. Written by a man managing an empire, surrounded by complexity and crisis, because he understood that the only place real action was possible, the only place genuine peace was available, was inside the present moment. Not the remembered past. Not the imagined future. Here. Now. This. The Stoic practice of present moment return is not passive. It is not the same as telling yourself to relax, or simply deciding to stop worrying. It is an active, deliberate redirection of attention, practiced repeatedly, patiently, without self-criticism when the mind drifts, because the mind will always drift. The practice is not achieving a state where drifting stops. The practice is the returning itself, over and over, without drama, without judgment, just noticing the drift and coming back. Here is how this habit takes practical shape in the texture of an ordinary day. When you notice the mind has traveled into regret about the past or anxiety about the future, pause. Take one breath that you actually feel, not a performed breath, not a technique, just air moving in, expanding the chest, and releasing. In that breath, notice 3 things you can physically sense right now. The temperature of the air, the feeling of ground beneath your feet, a sound present in the room, the weight of your own hands. These sensory anchors are not distractions from real life. They are re-entries into it. They pull the mind out of the imagined timeline it was inhabiting and return it to the only timeline where anything actually exists. This one. This practice sounds almost embarrassingly simple for something being presented as a Stoic habit. And that simplicity is precisely why most people underestimate it, skip past it looking for something more sophisticated, and continue suffering inside mental time travel that the simplest consistent redirection could interrupt. Do not underestimate simple things practiced consistently. The Stoics never did. The second dimension of this habit involves how you engage with your daily activities. Most people are physically present in their lives while being mentally elsewhere almost continuously. Eating while scrolling. Listening to someone while composing a response internally. Completing work tasks while simultaneously managing a background conversation with themselves about whether they're doing enough, being enough, moving fast enough. This divided attention is not multitasking. It is the experience of never being fully anywhere. And a mind that is never fully anywhere is a mind that is perpetually slightly dissatisfied, perpetually slightly anxious, perpetually chasing a sense of presence and engagement that keeps slipping because it's being pursued in a fragmented state that cannot hold it. Choose one daily activity and give it your complete, undivided, deliberate attention. Not forever, for the duration of that one activity. If it's a meal, actually taste it, actually be there for it. If it's a conversation, actually listen. Not to respond, but to understand. Actually be with that person rather than partially somewhere else. If it's a task, work on that task alone. Close the other tabs, remove the competing inputs, and bring your full capacity to bear on one thing at a time. This practice, deceptively simple, genuinely rare in modern life, trains the mind in presence the same way physical exercise trains the body in strength. Repeatedly, incrementally, building capacity through consistent use until presence becomes less of an effort and more of a natural state. And as presence builds, something remarkable happens to negative thoughts. They do not disappear. That was never the goal. But they lose the grip they have when the mind is already half elsewhere, already destabilized by the drift between past regret and future fear. A fully present mind meets a negative thought from a position of groundedness. It sees the thought clearly, without the amplification that comes from an already scattered mental state. It can respond rather than react. Choose rather than be swept. Habit 10. Commit to your own standard, not the world's noise. This is the habit that holds all the others together, the one that determines whether everything covered across these 7 parts becomes a genuine transformation or just another collection of ideas consumed and forgotten. Here is the uncomfortable truth sitting underneath every Stoic teaching ever written. None of this works without a personal standard. A line you draw, quietly, without announcement, without needing anyone's approval, about how you are going to operate inside your own mind, regardless of what the world around you is doing. Not a perfect standard. Not a standard that leaves no room for bad days, for struggle, for being human in all the messy ways that being human requires. A directional standard. A compass point rather than a destination. A commitment to the orientation of your choices, even when the execution is imperfect. The world will not support this standard. Understand that clearly from the beginning, and stop waiting for external validation of an internal decision. The world is structured, socially, commercially, algorithmically, to keep your attention scattered, your emotions reactive, your sense of self contingent on external approval, and your mind too loud and too busy to access the clarity that would make you significantly harder to manipulate and significantly less dependent on what the world is selling. A clear mind is not profitable for systems built on distraction. A person who has mastered their internal narrative does not need the constant consumption that fills the void of an unexamined one. This is not conspiracy. It is simply the natural consequence of building environments optimized for engagement rather than well-being, which means the standard must come from inside. It must be chosen by you, held by you, and renewed by you daily, not because everyone around you is doing the same, but because you have decided that the quality of your own mind matters enough to protect it even when protection is inconvenient. Epictetus, who had every external reason to abandon any standard whatsoever, who existed in conditions of complete external powerlessness, held an internal standard so immovable that it produced a philosophy studied 2,000 years after his death. His external circumstances were beyond his control. His internal standard was entirely his own, and he understood with absolute clarity that the second one was the only one that ultimately mattered. That is the final Stoic habit, not a technique, a decision. A daily, renewed, quietly held decision that your mind is yours to direct, that the thoughts running through it are not automatically true simply because they appear, that the stories being told inside it are not fixed simply because they are familiar, that the quality of your mental life is not determined by what happens to you but by the standard you maintain in how you respond. Every habit covered in these 7 parts, naming thoughts to diffuse them, pausing before reacting, guarding what enters the mind, sitting with silence, rewriting the internal narrative, using the body to reset the mind, closing open loops, embracing voluntary discomfort, returning to the present moment. Every single one of them is an expression of this one underlying commitment. The commitment that says, I am not willing to let my mind be run by default settings installed without my permission. I am not willing to keep inheriting the mental patterns of people who were themselves running inherited patterns they never examined. I am not willing to hand the most valuable thing I own, my own attention, my own interpretation of reality, my own interior life, to every external force that reaches for it. This mind is mine. I will direct it. Imperfectly, patiently, consistently, and without waiting for conditions to be perfect before beginning. That is Stoicism, lived, not studied. Not admired from a distance. Lived, not in the dramatic moments, in the ordinary ones, in the moment the negative thought surfaces and you pause before believing it, in the moment discomfort arrives and you move toward it instead of away, in the moment the mind drifts to past or future and you bring it, gently, without judgment, again and again, back to now. Those moments, strung together across days and weeks and years, are not small, they are everything. They are the difference between a life lived inside a mind that runs you and a life lived inside a mind you have learned, slowly, honestly, imperfectly, to run yourself. Marcus Aurelius ended many of his journal entries not with conclusions, but with redirections. Reminders back to principle when he had drifted. Evidence that even the most disciplined mind required daily return to what it had chosen to value. Consider this your reminder. You have everything you need to begin. Not someday, not when life settles. Now, with the mind you currently have, in the circumstances currently surrounding you, starting with the single next thought you choose to meet differently than you met the last one. That is enough to start. And starting, honestly and consistently, is enough to change everything. If these 7 parts added something real to how you think about your own mind, share this with someone who needs it. Not as a gesture, but because the person you're thinking of right now, the one who came to mind while reading this, actually needs to hear it. One conversation, one shared video, one moment of genuine connection around ideas that matter, that ripple goes further than either of you will ever fully see. And if this channel has given you something worth coming back for, make it part of your regular mental diet. New conversations about Stoic living, about building mental clarity in a world designed to fragment it, about becoming someone whose inner life is genuinely their own. That's what Stoic origin is here for, not to give you inspiration that fades by morning. To give you tools that work on the hardest days, in the quietest moments, when nobody is watching and the only thing that matters is what you choose to do with your own mind. That conversation continues here, and it's worth being part of.